Hey guys, welcome to my Paladin tanking guide. So, this class is basically your Holy Avenger taking on the pain on behalf of the raid. Palis really have a lot going for them and a whole bunch of tricks that really make them very different from, well, when you compare them to other tanking classes. Yeah, you're a sword and board meat shield, but you're not exactly a warrior. You can heal up, create absorbs for yourself, and have some useful mitigation abilities. So the Paladin is pretty much or sort of like a Death Knight in terms of the number of skills that can be used. In its earliest forms, Paladins only had one resource to worry about, and that's mana. There is now the Holy Power resource to worry about or manage. This second resource is increased by abilities like, or generated by abilities like Crusader Strike, and is consumed by skills like Word of Glory. Now, we'll go into the abilities details a bit later, but what's important for now is the proper management of these resources. Proper timing, proper usage, and even pooling is important for you for you to become a successful Paladin tank. Before jumping into the talent tree for protection Paladins, one other thing I want to mention is that Paladins actually use seals. So seals are pretty much sort of like Death Knight presences in that you can switch out depending on your need. You can choose from three. The first one is Seal of Truth. It's a damage seal that deals extra holy damage based on weapon damage. It also applies the Censure damage over time or dot effect, which can stack up to 5 times. The second seal is Seal of Righteousness. It's also a damage seal, but it's an AoE effect, so it damages all nearby melee targets based on weapon damage. The third seal is Seal of Insight. It increases the healing you do by 5% and gives your melee attack a chance to heal you. So since this is a tanking video, you would normally be sitting on this seal unless you, are overgeared for the content, or you have the, you're just basically really confident with the healers you're running with. Right, now that we're done with that, we can go into my talent spec suggestions for protection Paladins. The protection spec, while keeping your Righteous Fury buff on, which helps you generate threat, is your Pally tanking spec. So in addition to your usual skills just being given to you while you're leveling, you get to pick from the following. So for the first tier, you can sit with Pursuit of Justice, as it increases your base movement speed by 15%. Now for every charge of Holy Power resource up to a maximum of 3, you get another 5% move speed increase. Now in case you are in an encounter that requires a pretty noticeable burst of speed, you can go with Speed of Light, which gives you 70% additional speed for 8 seconds. If you need frequent but slower speed bursts of about 45%, you could go with Long Arm of the Law, provided you land successful judgment attacks. For tier 2, it's a control effect tier, which is useful for non-immune adds. So if you need to crowd control only one mob, of course you go with Fist of Justice for a stun effect, or Repentance for an incapacitate or sap-like effect. If you choose Fist of Justice, it will replace your standard Hammer of Justice skill. Blinding Light is useful in scenarios where you are tanking multiple adds and you need to disorient them for about 6 seconds. In my opinion, Fist of Justice or Blinding Light are quite useful from experience. Now for tier 3, my suggestion is to go with Sacred Shield, as it is a mitigation ability. So it specifically gives you a buff for about 30 seconds that absorbs damage, and this is modified by spell power for every 6 seconds. So the second option, which is also strong, is Eternal Flame, which replaces your Word of Glory ability. So in addition to giving you an immediate heal if you need it, it also gives a heal over time effect, which lasts for 10 seconds per holy power used. The hot effect is stronger when used on yourself. So Selfless Healer, the third talent, is useful but not as beneficial compared to Sacred Shield. Now for the fourth tier, it's pretty much all about Unbreakable Spirit, unless you have an encounter that requires otherwise. So Unbreakable Spirit halves the cooldown of your Divine Shield, Divine Protection, and Lay on Hand skills. Clemency can be useful for abilities like Hand of Freedom, as it will now add a charge to your ability, making it possible to use it twice in a row. Hand of Purity allows you to shake off harmful DOT or damage over time effects by 80% and get an overall 10% damage mitigation. Tier 5 can be a tough tier to choose from, but I find Holy Avenger to be the best in, well, most cases. All your abilities that generate holy power will do more damage and healing. In addition, for Holy Avenger, the same abilities will generate 3 holy power instead of 1. It's a threat boost and gives you quicker access to abilities that can save you. So one other option is Divine Purpose. It gives you a 25% chance to, to basically have back-to-back usage of either Word of Glory or Shield of the Righteous. It's a bit risky though, since it is proc based. The last option for this tier is Sanctified Wrath, which causes your Holy Wrath AoE ability to generate 1 holy power and do 100% more damage. It's quite useful, especially in AoE situations since it gives you more holy power. Now, for the 6th tier, it offers talents with a mix of damage and healing. So you can go with any talent based on your preference. If you like single target heal or DPS, pick Execution Sentence. This ability has a pretty nice graphic actually, where you see a hammer falling down from above and either heals a friendly target immediately with a decreasing heal over time effect. So the damage side is opposite in that the damage numbers start off slow and then you get a final burst. Now, Light's Hammer is basically a targeted AoE ground effect, so all enemies within the radius of Light's Hammer take damage over time and are slowed. Nearby allies are healed over time, so it's pretty good mix as I mentioned. Now, Holy Prism is a targeted effect. If you hit an enemy, it damages the target and heals 5 nearby raid members. If you target a friendly, you heal that target and deal damage to 5 nearby enemies. So as I mentioned, you can pick any of these talents as they are just a mix of damage and healing. For the last tier, it offers 3 similar choices that are useful but varies in difficulty of usage. So if you're just, starting out, the easiest to manage is Holy Shield, which increases your block chance and allows you to block spells. Successful blocks also damages your attacker. The next talent is an activated ability called Seraphim. So Seraphim buffs you immensely by increasing your stats by about 1,000 for 15 seconds, but it consumes 5 holy power, and it also has a 30-second cooldown. Now, the last talent is the most versatile, but it requires more attention and management. So Empowered Seals causes your judgment attacks to buff you based on your active seal. You can gain a healing buff, a haste buff, or an attack power buff. You can have all 3 buffs active, but my suggestion if you pick Empowered Seals is it would be better to switch based on your greatest need. Okay, it's time to move on to your stat priority, the gems, enchants, and other buffs you're going to need. Now, when Draenor first came out, it used to be easy to determine the stat priority for the Paladin. However, a recent hotfix has been applied which has SimCrafters changing up the recommended priorities. Now, just to factor everything in, from what I've read and my own experience, here is my recommended list. So it's bonus armor, mastery, haste, and crit strike. So, for bonus armor, it's as with my other tank guides, it's still the best. Again, as a reminder, this also buffs your attack power values. Now, the second talent to go for is still mastery, and that's just based on my experience. While haste appears to be ahead on simulations, especially on this very good blog, it's called Sacred Duty, I still, prefer the mastery route. Mastery increases your block chance, the effects of Shield of the Righteous, and your attack power. I also like to run with the talent Holy Shield when I'm feeling lazy, although that's not really a good reason to use. Anyway, so the talent Holy Shield just makes mastery even better. Now, the third recommendation is haste. Now, it's still a great stat to aim for if you can put a lot into it, especially if you push it to 50%. With the hotfix, it is easier more than ever due to your Sacred Duty passive, which was buffed to getting 30% more haste from all sources. Now, I think prior we were just getting around 5%. Because of another passive called Sanctity of Battle, the cooldown of abilities like Shield of the Righteous and Avenger's Shield is also reduced. So this is basically in addition to your global cooldown or your GCD being reduced, and if you hit 50%, GCD is reduced to 1%, and that is amazing. Now, the fourth recommendation is Critical Strike. It's basically just due to your riposte ability or passive, which gives you additional parry chance based on 100% of your critical chance from gear. So with that, your gems, enchants, and other buffs, you will still follow the same priority. Now, I normally go with Mastery, but since it is possible to also go with Haste as your top stat, you can pick either from the stuff you're seeing on your screen. So for your neck, ring, and cloak, it's either Breath of Mastery or Breath of Haste, or of course, as I keep mentioning in my other guides, if you have the gold, of course, go for the gift versions. For your gems, you will also follow the same priority. You can go with Mastery Talidite or Haste Talidite. If you're already close to the 50% haste value, you might want to consider swapping out some Mastery enchants or gems for the haste buff. A 1 second, I guess I'll just repeat it, a 1 second global cooldown for your abilities is quite awesome. Now, for your food buff, you either go with your Mastery or your haste buffs. If you feel that you're taking in damage that your healers can't keep up with, you can also pick a stamina food buff. Now, for your flask buff, it's pretty standard unless new ones are added when patch 6.1 drops. It's still your Draenic stamina flask or the more expensive one. Okay, now it's time to discuss the non-talent abilities available to the Paladin. So let's just first go into, as with my other guides, let's go for the defensive ones first. So the first one I'll mention is Lay on Hands. It's a targeted heal that grants health equal to your maximum health. This ability causes Forbearance on the target, which prevents application of another Lay on Hands or other Forbearance causing abilities. Now, the second one is Divine Shield, or the Pally Bubble, the famous Pally Bubble. It makes you immune to all forms of damage for about 8 seconds. So if you use this ability, get ready to quickly clear it off and taunt off your current target, as it will go for the next raid member on the threat table. It also causes Forbearance, the Forbearance debuff, like Lay on Hands. Now, Guardian of Ancient Kings provides you a damage reduction buff for 8 seconds, so it mitigates a pretty good amount of, basically 50% damage. It provides 50% damage reduction. This is one of the better damage reduction abilities in the game. Now, next is Ardent Defender. It's another excellent defensive ability. Upon activation, it gives you 20% damage reduction in a 10-second window. Now, while it's up, Ardent Defender, it prevents any attack from bringing you to 0 HP and instead heals you. So the buff disappears when this effect is triggered. Next is Divine Protection. It's your magic damage reduction cooldown. It mitigates 40% damage for 8 seconds. If you're taking in a mix of magic and physical damage, you might want to consider the Glyph of Divine Protection, as it has the magic reduction, but in exchange it gives you 20% physical damage mitigation. Next is Hammer of Justice. It's your basic stun with a 6-second cooldown. To improve this ability, pick the talent Fist of Justice for a longer range and shorter cooldown. Next is, you're going to be using this very often, Word of Glory. It's a targeted heal that consumes up to 3 holy power. Next is also a very frequently used ability, is called Shield of the Righteous, and I mentioned I think a couple of times earlier. So it's like a warrior shield slam which damages the target, but it grants you a buff that mitigates physical damage taken for about 3 seconds. It also buffs you with, well, it gives you the buff called Bastion of Glory, which increases your Word of Glory healing by 6%. So Bastion can stack up to 5 times. So while we're on that, I do have a glyph suggestion, and that's a glyph of Alabaster Shield. What it basically does is that a successful block increases the damage of Shield of the Righteous by 10%. So this can stack for, about 3 times. Next is Rebuke. It's your basic spell interrupt with a 15-second cooldown. Next is Cleanse. So it's an ability that can remove poison and disease effects, so it has an 8-second cooldown. Yeah, well, although healers will be on top of, the cleanse-like abilities, it's just important to be aware that this is something you can use in case your healers or other raid members are unable to do it for you. Okay, for your other abilities, first one is Hand of Protection. It's an ability that protects a party or raid member from all physical damage. However, they will be unable to attack or use physical abilities. This causes forbearance on the target. Next is Hand of Sacrifice. It buffs another raid member so that 30% of the damage they take is transferred to you in a 12-second window. Or it also breaks once 100% of their max health has been transferred. While we're on that, I do have a glyph suggestion, and that's called Glyph of Hand of Sacrifice. What it does is basically Hand of Sacrifice no longer transfers the damage to you, so that's really useful. Next is Hand of Salvation. So it removes all threat generated by a raid member for about 10 seconds. And the last hand ability is Hand of Freedom. So it makes the target immune to all roots and snares for about 6 seconds. So I've discussed all the hand abilities. It's important to know that all these abilities can be improved by the talent Clemency, which I mentioned in the tier 4 talent section. Now, Reckoning is your standard taunt ability with an 8-second cooldown. Okay, now that we're done with that, let's now jump into the other abilities that you'll need in encounters. But at the same time, let's also go through your rotations. So, but before that, and before going to the battle, let's make sure the following are ready. So, first of all, is Righteous Fury. It should be up in case you decided to turn it off for some reason. Next is, of course, your food buff. Third is your flask buff. Also, make sure that the correct blessing or raid buff should be up unless someone in the raid group has already provided a similar buff. So that's either Blessing of Kings or Blessing of Might. And the fifth one, if in case you pick that talent, make sure that Sacred Shield is already up. Now, for your AoE rotation, it's basically this one. So throw out your Avenger Shield at range, judge the target, use Hammer of the Righteous, and make sure you don't use Crusader Strike. So there is a proc that you need to watch out for. That's called Grand Crusader. If that procs, which resets your Avenger Shield cooldown, make sure you use Avenger Shield. Next on your rotation is Holy Wrath, then Consecration, and then Lighthammer or Holy Prism if you pick that talent. So just make sure that you always prioritize Holy Power generators when they're up, and use Word of Glory and or Shield of the Righteous as needed. So again, just the Shield of the Righteous can be inserted for every 3 Holy Power that you make to raise your Bastion of Glory stacks. But again, this is really based on need. Now, for your single target rotation, the priority, as you know, with your AoE rotation, is to generate Holy Power. So it would sometimes look like this. So you judge the target, you use Crusader Strike, Holy Wrath if you pick the Sanctified Wrath talent, and then Avenger Shield, and then Consecration, and then you basically use whichever tier 6 talent you picked, and then Hammer of Wrath during the execute phase, or that's about 20%, or when the boss is at about 20%. So again, as I mentioned, just prioritize your Holy Power generators. Alright, so macros and add-ons time. So Well, basically, I don't use a whole lot, but the most useful ones for me are the ones that can cancel out Divine Shield and Hand of Protection. So it would look like what you're seeing on the screen right now. So it just, for the Divine Shield one, it just makes it easier for me to use Divine Shield and quickly turn it off. As the second one is Hand of Protection. It just, again, it just makes it easier for me to remove the Hand of Protection buff. So there are other useful macros like the mouse over macros that I don't well normally use. Example is what you're seeing right now is for lay on hands. So it just makes it easier for me to just mouse over a particular raid member and just cast, or even on myself, just cast lay on hands. So again, you can just modify it to just fit your needs. So for add-ons, I still pretty much recommend the standard ones I keep mentioning. The first one is Deadly Boss Mods. The second one is ELV UI, and the third one is SCADA. Okay, so and that's it for my Pally tanking guide. So I hope this was useful in getting you ready for the basics of Paladin tanking. Now, I really wanted to do all classes for tanking, but I somehow got stuck at level 50 with my monk. Well, the motivation just really isn't there. Hopefully, I can get it out some time in the future, maybe after patch 6.1 drops, but yeah, I'm not sure. So anyway, check out my other tanking videos and guides that I made by clicking on that video on your left. And like this video if you liked it, and support me by hitting that subscribe button on the right. So guys, as always, thanks for watching.